Good evening. My name is Hélène Cazes. I'm very grateful and also honored to have been asked by Cabaret, Voltaire and Diversions to open this festival, Hexennacht 2022. I'm a professor at the University of Victoria, and the first slide of my PowerPoint, which is following, will acknowledge with you our territories. We acknowledge and we respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, where we live, where we meet. And we acknowledge and respect the Sanghees, Esquimalt and Wassanich people, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. So I've been asked to open this festival, I think, because for the past years, I've been working on the links between the defense of women, what is also called the proto-feminism, and the history of medicine. That's a research project called Perfecta, and I'm always pleased to talk about it. But that's not what I will do this evening for you. This evening, we'll talk about women meeting in the night, like you are doing, women making music in the night, like you are doing, women celebrating being together in the night, as you will be doing. These images of women gathering in the night are familiar to us, and actually they are mythic. They come from the past, from the darkness of our past, but also they come with smiles and joy. These images talk about women, about what has been said of women, and about what has been done to women in our cultures. The meeting in the night, in itself, this is the event, the action, and the dream. That's why I'm extremely grateful to be part of your meeting this night, or the night to come. Women meeting in the night are not only together, but they show that they are together, and they write a new chapter in the history of women meeting in the night. Allow me, for a start, to play the reinvention of this myth of women in the night. It's a scene in the movie done by Céline Sciamma called Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I chose the appearance of music and the recognition of love. It's in the night, there is a fire. Listen at these women around the bonfire. Listen at them while they are singing, talking. They are claiming to be and to be free, like us, together with music, with nothingness too, the darkness, the repetitive lyrics, and the fire. Women in the night, mirrors, smoked, fires, joys, and pride, or some musings and memories before the music starts. These women surprised to be there, surprised to be together. What do they say? What are they singing? Which are their names? Where is this happening? None of these matters. They are together and they are in the night. They are free because they are together in the night. And the music chosen for this excerpt, which is the first music in the whole movie, this music, this is theirs. They're clapping, they're singing. Not a concert, not a score, the pure consciousness of being together. Céline Sciamma told to IndieWire that she first wanted to find some 18th century music for this scene, but she never could come across anything that she would like. So then she wrote the lyrics herself, and she asked her tomboy collaborator and electronic producer Parawan to write the music with Arthur Simonini. It's a very strange and very striking music. The lyrics mean, I cannot fly, I cannot flee, sorry, but there was a mistake in one of the translations in the two papers I'm quoting there. It means I cannot escape, I cannot flee. And it's repetitive, but they are actually fleeing and escaping because they sing. And they are in Latin, because Latin is the language of magic. It's the language of science and also the language of Inquisition in the 18th century. The fire, when it touches the lady, interrupts everything and brings the scene to a close. It's the fire of love, of course, but it also brings back in this movie a stark reminder. The fire of a then forbidden passion burns, but also the joyful bonfire turns into a stake. The darkness of past night comes back to mind. Times when women at night were persecuted, executed, killed for imaginary Sabbath with the devil. And the images of these times are very present in this scene and in the whole movie by Céline Sciamma. These were times where the mythology of witchcraft trespassed the limits imposed by the church and gave way to numerous and spectacular feminicides. I wish, before I go further, to give a warning. Parts of this presentation may trigger trauma, and they may bring some serious discomfort, as they will relate and evoke violence against women, like the one which is there where the lady on fire is literally on fire and is represented as taken by the devil. In the movie, the love is still on fire, but the dress doesn't burn, and the woman lives. Maybe she's a little dead inside, a part of her dies, but she keeps her life. Why am I talking about past painful events, another history which is not ours anymore? And without drama nor spectacle, that's not for fun. Why? First, out of sense of solidarity with women who have been thrown into oblivion and nothingness, without names, just numbers for many of them, without personal histories for all of them. They were crushed by history and by historiography. They were chased out of our collective memory, out of a duty of memory and out of compassion too. I wish to include them in this presentation. And at the end of this PowerPoint, which is quite brief now, I will present a mix of trial records, and you will see also some images as a memorial for these women. Second reason for evoking this past. It's out of a fascination for myth and for history. Women in the night. Let's say that a myth is a collective story, that its sharing makes community, and that our myths also make our communities look as they do. History and activists do like ironic turns. The Sabbath, an invention of women haters or fearers in times of collective panics, is the reversal of a long-known practice, unwritten, of fertility cults and rites. From the whiteness of priestess dresses in the night, the myth has turned into darkness, illuminated by its stakes. From feminine to masculine law, written and forced. That's the first irony. But then again, at the onset of the 20th century, the myth of Sabbath was turned again by women and by friends of women into a celebration of female power and of an essential connection with nature that would be reserved to women. The magic that used to be used as a chief of accusation against women, witches, became a power, an empowerment. And the ancient insult that was in the mouth of the insulted, the word magic, became a praise, a claim. Feminists are used to these kinds of reversals. Think of the movement of the sluts, for instance. The stake was made a bonfire, again, two ironies to right a wrong. These are my reasons, the main ones, for addressing briefly painful topics, as respectfully and as compassionately as I can. I'll start with this indistinct history. Historiography, and I mean by that word the choices and the methods for writing history. Historiography has long been silencing women's voices. Their texts were not written, and when they were written, most often they were not copied, if not straightforwardly destroyed. Allow me to remember here one of the first Greek poets, one who gave to the poetry tradition metric and strophic structures, one who taught elegiac verse how to speak the language of love. I'm sure you know already whom I'm talking about. It's Sappho. She was, to quote Wikipedia, an archaic Greek poet from the island of Lesbos. She was called the 10th muse, or the poetess. Well, most of Sappho's poetry is now lost, and what is extant has mostly survived in fragmentary form. Only the Ode to Aphrodite is complete. For a long time, we had only 4 poems by this prolific poet. Very recently, a fifth poem was discovered. That's a wonderful story. I give the reference in the bibliography if you're interested. We now have 5 poems. The literary canon, once stewarded by ecclesiastics, could not allow a model to be feminine, especially when her poems were erotic. And this is how we lost one of the most important ensemble of works coming from the antiquity. We have 5 extant poems only from the most famous female writer of the antiquity. One shudders thinking of all the other poets, painters, musicians, philosophers, scientists, and all the other women who have disappeared in the cemetery of dogmatic and sexist posterities. This historiography indeed has made a desert of our past. Our witches of early modern times often have names, and they often have the voices of their trials records. Of course, one can wonder whether these are their voices or if they are a kind of sinister ventriloquy. In dialogue with their inquisitors, we hear them there. They claim to have flown on brooms, to have danced with Satan and changed into beasts. Still, they were women, living, real persons who uttered the words, or at least signed the depositions that we now have as records. Ventriloquy or not, these voices mirrored the delusions that were presented to them as truth about themselves, and maybe even they believed what they were saying or forced to say. Hexennacht 1662 ended up with a witch trial, one of the last ones in Augsburg. We do not have the records of this specific trial, but we have many records of other trials. They all tell the same stories over and over, stories that touch the myth, and that neither church orthodoxy nor common sense could debunk. These tales form a consistent and pervasive narrative of Sabbath, the mirror of a toxic fear of the marginal that became more and more directed at women in the 16th and 17th centuries. A way of othering the women, a way of controlling them too. Historian Carlo Ginzburg has described the main features of Sabbath, found in many records developed in treatises of demonology expanded in the first public news, flyers that were sold, and sold well when there was an execution. I'll quote his introductions. That's the description of what is called Sabbath. Male and female witches met at night, generally in solitary places, in fields or on mountains. Sometimes, having anointed their bodies, they flew, arriving astride poles or broomsticks. Sometimes they arrived on the backs of animals or transformed into animals themselves. Those who came for the first time had to renounce the Christian faith, desecrate the sacrament, and offer homage to the devil, who was present in human or, most often, animal or semi-animal form. They would follow banquets, dancing, sexual orgies. Before returning home, the female and male witches received evil ointments made from children's fat and other ingredients. These are the basic features that recur in most descriptions of the Sabbath. Local variations, especially in the name given to the gatherings, were frequent. Alongside the term Sabbath, of obscure etymology and late diffusion, we find scholarly expressions such as Sagarum Synagoga or Strigiarum Conventus, which translated a myriad of popular terms such as triads, balot, aquelarre, and so on. But this terminological variety is offset by the extraordinary uniformity in the confessions of those who participated in the nocturnal gatherings. From the witchcraft trials held throughout Europe between the beginning of the 15th century and the end of the 17th, as well as from the demonology treatises directly or indirectly based on them, there emerges an image of the Sabbath, which is basically similar to that briefly described above. It indicated to contemporaries the existence of an actual sect of female and male witches, much more dangerous than the isolated figures familiar for centuries of sorceresses or enchanters. The uniformity of the confessions was considered proof that the followers of this sect were ubiquitous and everywhere practiced the same horrific rituals. Let's stop just a minute there. The uniformity of the confessions. Yes, it is a sign. I don't believe that it could reasonably be considered as a proof of any other thing than the uniformity of what people wanted to hear in confessions. And this is how I address the testimonies that I'm going to show you. The story was known, and as Ginsburg says, there was a fairly fixed description of Sabbath with the same features in all stories. Images did circulate the stories too, and the commentaries would fill in the details. You see here an early one in 1514 by Hans Baldung, who also painted many scenes with Sabbath, and also an engraving much later in the 18th century, taking the same themes with the flying on the brooms and the devil coming to pick up the guests. This is maybe the most famous one and well-known. This is a detail of Albrecht Dürer's Sabbath at the end of the 15th century. And we see this woman riding the goat and holding some cannibalistic meal. She has no limit, and this exuberant freedom is shown by her hair that are not attached and fly with her. This is a long-lasting obsession in the world of paintings, as well as in the world of literary and theological texts, a real myth. And I show you here two paintings by Goya at the end of the 18th century, called both of them the Witches Sabbath. Both folklore and the first flyers were inspired by these stories theorized by the demonologists that they themselves amplified and enriched. You see here, yeah, better now, the front page and one of the engravings of the bestsellers of these demonology treatises, the Malleus Maleficarum. Also, the official position of the church was for a long time that witchcraft was a delusion and that in no way it could alter the substances of God's creatures, which means in no way one human being could be changed into a beast, for instance. So also for a long time, the church held that believing in the delusion was a sign of allegiance to the devil. Still, it wasn't. both folklore and the ancestors of our newspapers, the information flyers of the time, were inspired by these stories that were theorized by demonologists at the same time. And both folklore and flyers themselves amplified and enriched these stories. You see here the Malleus Maleficarum in one of these, in his many editions with an engraving. This was the first book written on how to find and confound witches. It was also the first book to assimilate witchcraft with heresy. It had a huge influence, and the assimilation of witchcraft to heresy allowed the Inquisition tribunal to be judge of the witchcraft cases. Still, as of the sinister Malleus Maleficarum, even theologians began to believe in their own myth. Condemned and then approved by the Church, the Malleus Maleficarum, and here please note the feminine form in Latin with Maleficarum, the hammer of the witches, the she-witches. So this book, published in Strasbourg or in Speyer in 1444 or in 1446, has been reedited, copied, cited for more than 3 centuries. Between 1487 and 1520, 20 editions of the Malleus Maleficarum were published, and another 16 between 1574 and 1669. These are many editions and reeditions. It was the book in use at the Salem witch trials in 1692, 1693. These terrifying stories were relayed by the ancestors of our newspapers and news feeds. Here is the story of Anne Ebler, not exactly comic strips, but rather tragic strips. It was published in 1669, and it tells the story with the letters that you can see in the images and that are developed in the text. In this little flyer, you see Anna Ebler when she is abducted from a dance by the devil and led to her house. Ebler's night ride with the evil one is described then in B. You see her in the sky. Then she goes at the witches' dance in C, and at the witches' assembly and diabolic feast in D. Last on this page, she is interrogated and she confesses about her own witchcraft. And you see her 3 judges from the Inquisition. And she tells how she perverted 2 innocent children, a boy and a girl. You see her in the middle, in the center image, led to execution and branded with burning tongues. And last, she's executed and you see her body burnt to ashes. But then let's go to joy. The reversal of Sabbath did not come from reason, nor from psychiatry. Also, psychiatry is born as a branch of medicine and as a science from the opposition to witch trials. It's not born either from institutions. It came from women and scholars, fascinated by paganism after the reign of a starch Victorian Puritanism. To give an example, Wicca was developed in England during the first half of the 20th century and made public in 1954. It coincides with the feminist movement, and I took some lovely suffragettes there. And Wicca was a syncretic combination of occultism, anti-Christianism, and neo-paganism. It was feminist, most of all. Around these years, anthropologists started to explore the primitive matriarchy of human societies. In this context, witchcraft had become a master word for women's liberation. And so we have a new and ironical turn for our myth of Sabbath. This is this freedom, whether newly recovered or mythically reinvented in the 20th century, that is celebrated at Hexennacht 2022. A freedom that chooses the night, the togetherness, and the nothingness. A freedom to be. These imagined orgies and rites often had music according to the regal trials. The devil plays the fiddle or the recorder. Well, they had music, ours do too. Please enjoy yourselves, and have a thought for these women who certainly enjoyed themselves and were condemned for that. Last warning, watch the hem of your dress if you dance too close to the bonfire. Thank you for your attention. Merci.
From Carlo Ginzburg. Male and female witches met at night, generally in solitary places, in fields or on mountains. Sometimes, having anointed their bodies, they flew, arriving astride poles or broomsticks. Sometimes they arrived on the backs of animals, or transformed into animals themselves. Those who came for the first time had to renounce the Christian faith, desecrate the sacrament, and offer homage to the devil, who was present in human or most often animal or semi-animal form. There would follow banquets, dancing, sexual orgies. Before returning home, the female and male witches received evil ointments made from children's fat and other ingredients. These are the basic features that recur in most descriptions of the Sabbath. The Canon Episcopi, as early as the 10th century, the Canon of the Bishop. Some wicked women, it declares, reverting to Satan, and seduced by the illusions and phantasms of demons, believe and profess that they ride at night with Diana on certain beasts, with an innumerable multitude of women, passing over immense distances, obeying her commands as her mistress, and evoked by her on certain nights. It were well if they alone perished in their infidelity, and did not draw so many along with them. For innumerable multitudes, deceived by this false opinion, believe all this to be true, and thus relapse into pagan errors. Therefore, priests everywhere should preach that they know this to be false, and that such phantasms are sent by the evil spirit who deludes them in dreams. Who is there who is not led out of himself in dreams, seeing much in sleeping that he never saw waking? And who is such a fool that he believes that to happen to the body, which is only done in the spirit? It is to be taught that he who believes such things has lost his faith, and that he who has not the true faith is not of God, but of the devil.
in Lancashire, a meeting of witches in the Malkin Tower, residence of Elizabeth Sauternes, alias Oldham Dyke. 9-year-old Janet Device, despite her age, a keeper. On Good Friday, 1612, were about 20 people, all but 2 of them women, and some of whom I recognized, came together and had to their dinners beef, bacon, and roasted mutton.
February 1673. August last, I have met an old man with ragged clothes. He warned me that I was going to be bridled like a horse and ridden to a meeting, and there various strange things would happen, and I should on no account eat any of the food which might be offered to me. Then, shortly before Christmas, a woman called Anne Forrester, I had previously bargained about eggs with her. She came to me. She put a bridle on me, and my head took the shape of a horse's. After this, Forrester rid upon me cross-legged until she came upon the rest of her companions at Riddinge Millbridgend. This is where they usually met. The assembly stood all upon a bare spot of ground, and I sang to them whilst they danced in several shapes, first of a hare, then in their own, and then in a cat, and sometimes in a mouse, and several other shapes. Anne Bates was going to the meetings, riding upon wooden dishes and eggshells, and when she arrived, changing into various shapes, letting the devil, who she called her protector, see how many shapes she could turn herself into. The devil put a stone on the ground, and the witches gathered around it, and said the Lord's Prayer backwards. 10th February that year, I was ridden upon by an enchanted bridle by Mitchell Ainsley and Margaret, his wife. The enchanted bridle was taken off when we came to the meeting place.
I tied them to a bush and beat them, at which one of them turned into one Dickinson's wife, a neighbor. She put a bridle on me, which changed me into a horse, and rode me to a witches' meeting on Pandon Hill. Their wishes were roasting meat, and I was offered food and drink, which I refused after the first taste.
And I should on no account eat any of the food which might be offered to
I
me.
then came upon the
Then,
wishes,
shortly
pulling
before
and roast,
Christmas, a
and
woman called
bringing
Anne
down
Forrester,
roasted meat,
I had
butter,
previously
and hot
bargained
milk.
about eggs with
I
her.
met with the
She
devil,
came to me. She
and
put a
I
bridle
found
on
the
me,
devil
and my
in
head
a
took the shape of a
of a
horse's.
boy with cloven
After
foot.
this, Forrester rid upon me cross-legged until she came upon the rest of her companions at Riddinge Millbridgend. This is where they usually met. The assembly stood all upon a bare spot of ground, and I sang to them whilst they danced in several shapes, first of a hare, then in their own, and then in a cat, and sometimes in a mouse, and several other shapes. Anne Bates was going to the meetings, riding upon wooden dishes and eggshells, and when she arrived, changing into various shapes, letting the devil, who she called her protector, see how many shapes she could turn herself into. The devil put a stone on the ground, and the witches gathered around it, and said the Lord's Prayer backwards. 10th February that year, I was ridden upon by an enchanted bridle by Mitchell Ainsley and Margaret, his wife. The enchanted bridle was taken off when we came to the meeting place,
where there was at that time between 30 and 40 witches who did all right to the said meeting. And then of the said meeting was to consult for the killing and hunting of a man and beast, and that there was one devil or spirit that was more great
Sometimes
and
having anointed their
grand
bodies,
devil
they flew,
than the rest,
arriving at red
and
poles or
further
broomsticks.
say that the
Sometimes
devil
they
can
arrive on the
rise,
backs of animals,
cold
or
weather, and
transforming into
storms,
animals
and
themselves.
so he did at their
Those who came
meeting.
for the first time had to renounce the Christian faith, desecrate the sacrament, and offer homage to the devil, who was present in human or, most often, in animal or semi-animal form. There would follow banquets, dancing,
I met the
sexual
devil 10
orgies.
years previously, and
Before
I entered
returning
into a
home,
pact with
the
him.
female and male
More
witches
recently,
received
I and 3
evil
other women
ointments
met the devil
made
on a
from
nearby
children's fat and other
pond. One of the
ingredients.
other women, Alice Duke, she had brought a wax image of Elizabeth Hill. The devil took the image and he held it in his arms, and he anointed it with oil. He was the godfather and this examinand and Anne Bishop's godmothers. We stuck thorns in the wax image, after which we had wine, cakes, and roast meat, brought by the man in black, which we did eat and drink. We danced and we made merry, and we were bodily there in their clothes. We witches, we fly to our meetings after anointing themselves with oil. The devil would greet us on arrival. Proceedings are illuminated by wax candles like torches. At the meeting, we eat and dance, while the man in black sometimes plays on a pipe or cittern, and plots acts of maleficium. That those would-be witches, when they did receive the communion, must drink the wine and keep the bread, and carry with them and give it to the next body that they met with, and that should be a toad, and after that they should be witches. And that every midsummer eve, those that would be witches must meet upon the devil upon a hill, and then the devil did lick them, and that place was black, and the next midsummer eve the devil would meet them again and lick them as before.